Stay with us. We're about to take you on an exciting and bumpy ride.
From NBC News, Decision 2000, Election Night. Live from our election headquarters in New York, here is Tom Brokaw.
Good evening, everyone. It was not a false promise when we told you yesterday and the day before and all last week this promises to be one of the closest races in American presidential history. It is shaping up as just that tonight. Let's begin with NBC's Washington Bureau Chief, moderator of Meet the Press, Tim Russert. All eyes on Florida at this hour, Tim. Both campaigns made an enormous investment there. The governor is another Bush, Jeb Bush, but at 4 o'clock this morning, Al Gore was still in Florida.
Because George W. Bush knew, Tom, that he had to win Texas and Florida, his linchpins, because all along Gore had been suggesting he could win New York and California. With Florida a battleground, Gore believes if he can beat Bush there, he can change the whole dynamic of the race. We've been talking to the voters all day in Florida, and quite striking, Tom, everyone assumed it was going to be Social Security, the big issue. In fact, those 65 and older split evenly amongst the candidates. What we're looking at are the younger voters. The younger voters appear to have been much more favorably disposed to Al Gore. Why? Because of the economy. The race too close to call.
Okay, we want to remind everybody that the number they want to keep their eye on, as we will be as well tonight, is 270 electoral votes. There is the possibility, of course, that we'll have that split between the popular vote and the electoral vote, that one candidate could win more votes in terms of the popular election, but still lose the electoral vote. And the electoral vote is the vote that, of course, gets somebody to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. It happened 3 times in the 19th century. But it has not happened in the 20th century. Does it happen at the beginning of the 21st century? Stay tuned.
If you look at Florida right here, if Al Gore won Florida, George W. Bush would try to overcome or compensate for that by winning Pennsylvania. 25 electoral votes for Florida, 23 for Pennsylvania. Whether he can do that is anyone's guess. Ohio. The Bush people had created scenarios where they could win the election without winning Florida, without winning Pennsylvania, without winning Michigan. There is no scenario they can win this election without winning Ohio. Nail-biting time in Austin, Texas.
We're going to now project an important win for Vice President Al Gore. NBC News projects that he wins the 25 electoral votes in the state of Florida. It turns out that Governor Jeb Bush was not his brother's keeper. The family had been joking, and seriously, that it could be a cold Thanksgiving. Tim Russert, that's great news in Nashville tonight.
That is a very, very, very important state for Al Gore. And now the pressure is on George W. Bush in Pennsylvania and Michigan. And those polls close in about 10 minutes, Tom. All along, George W. Bush had been telling everybody, I'm going to carry Florida. I already have Texas. I'm going to carry Florida and then move up north. Without Florida now in his pocket, he really has to win those battleground Midwest states. Pennsylvania has 23 electoral votes. If he trades that for Florida, it's only a net loss of 2. If he loses Pennsylvania and Michigan, it gets very difficult to reach 270. Still doable, but very, very difficult. It means winning 10 of the 12 remaining battleground states, 5 of which have gone Democratic the last 3 times.
You know, there was a surprise in terms of why Al Gore did so well in Florida. We all assumed conventionally it was because of Social Security and the presence of the first Jewish vice presidential candidate on the ticket, and that's Joe Lieberman, the senator from Connecticut. But in fact, as you looked at those exit polls, people were making judgments based on other issues.
Like the economy. Economy.
So we feel very good about this evening in the state of Florida, which was a state that obviously 3 months ago most people thought we couldn't be competitive in, much less win. But Al Gore and Joe Lieberman spent a lot of time there, talked about the economy, talked about issues that are important to people in Florida, and they won.
Hillary Rodham Clinton now has 2 titles, First Lady of the United States and Senator-elect from the state of New York. NBC News projects that Hillary Rodham Clinton is the senator that has been elected to fill the seat occupied by Daniel Patrick Moynihan. It stays in the Democratic column. Big call, Tim. Pennsylvania goes to Vice President Al Gore. NBC News is projecting that Al Gore is the winner in Pennsylvania. That makes it, fair to say, all the more difficult for Governor Bush to put together a winning coalition here tonight. It's still not over by any means. We're about to call the state of Ohio, and in fact, we're going to put that in the column for George W. Bush, the governor from Texas. So that's, again, a matter of some relief to those people in Austin and certainly to the governor. It was a state that he'd counted on, and it took us a while to project the winner there, but it does go now into the column for George W. Bush. So the state of Ohio with 21 electoral votes goes into that Bush column, and that makes this race even tighter, Tim Russert.
Huge sigh of relief in Texas. He's still competitive in the Electoral College, Tom. Now all eyes on Wisconsin and Missouri, which he needs those desperately, George W. Bush.
Florida has been prematurely called. First of all, I thought it was a little bit irresponsible of the networks to call it before the polls closed in the western part of Florida. Florida is split among two time zones, Eastern and Central. You all called it before the polls had closed in the central part of the country. And what is happening is that we're piling up significant numbers of votes in a lot of counties in Florida, and the absentee ballots are going to come in very strong for Bush.
Do you think by tomorrow at noon you will have won the state of Florida? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, look, we've worked very hard on getting a record number of absentee ballots.
If you take away Florida, all bets are off.
Right.
Nor are we conceding anything in Florida. I know you've had all these projections that you've been reading about, but the people who are actually counting the votes are, Rooney, you need to...
For folks, it doesn't get any closer than that. 197 electoral votes to 198, and the Bush campaign is now contesting the projected victory for Al Gore in the state of Florida. We have colored that blue for Al Gore.
If Florida is being contested and that gets it back in play, we shake up the map all over again.
Florida, I've been asking all evening, how can you have that many absentee ballots out and assume that Governor Bush has lost the state? And as you know, Karl Rove has said adamantly they believe when the ballots are all counted, they're going to carry Florida. And I think some of the networks are beginning to back off.
What the networks giveth, the networks taketh away. NBC News is now taking Florida out of Vice President Gore's column and putting it back in the too close to call column. That has been the position of Governor Bush throughout the evening, and his chief strategist, Karl Rove, to say nothing of his brother, Jeb Bush, who is the governor of the state of Florida. We're told that just a few moments ago that Jeb Bush told his dad, former President Bush, that we won't know about Florida until at least midnight, between midnight and 1 a.m.
Bush at 217, Gore 173. 91 toss-up states. Florida 25, Arkansas, Arizona, Colorado, Wisconsin, Iowa, Nevada, Oregon, and Washington. 91 electoral votes. If either candidate won those all, they'd be the next president. We think Alaska is going to solidly go for Bush.
Right.
California, Hawaii, another 58 for Gore. So you add that on to Mr. Gore, he gets to 181 plus 50 would be 231 electoral votes. He's just 39 away, and Mr. Bush now is just 53 away. This is what they're battling, 53 out of here.
It's 11 o'clock in the east, it's 8 o'clock on the Pacific Rim, and those states now have closed their polls. NBC News projects that Vice President Al Gore wins the 54 electoral votes in the state of California.
I guess in the future you'll be looking back at this campaign, and how does it compare with the other ones that you've studied so closely?
Oh, well, there's no question that in a time of peace and prosperity like this, it's possible for the country to have such a division as they do.
Doris.
Uh-oh, something's happened.
George Bush is the president-elect of the United States. He has won the state of Florida, according to our projections. 25 electoral votes. NBC News projects that George Bush, it's been a night of first giving it to Al Gore, then taking it away on the part of the networks. George Walker Bush, the new president of the United States, the governor of Texas, the first father-son governor combination since the Adams family. This is the scene in Austin, Texas tonight. Karl Rove and the governor had a master strategy. They stuck to it, they were confident, and they proved right. Florida, in the final analysis, the home state of Governor Jeb Bush, it's going to be a much happier Thanksgiving for the Bush family. George Walker Bush, the 43rd President of the United States. And what a sweet moment this must be for the man they call Poppy. George Bush, the former President of the United States, will be hearing from the new President-elect of the United States momentarily.
I've also gotten some important details before we hear from Vice President Gore about the details of the call that has occurred between the President-elect and Vice President Gore. President-elect Bush telling the Vice President, quote, "You were a formidable opponent. I know this is hard on your family. Give my best to Tipper." A short call. It has occurred, and now both men will approach their waiting crowds of supporters to speak to them.
Look at this in Florida. Here we are, 99% of the vote in. We have projected it, obviously, for George W. Bush. Good grief. Look at that.
11. That means automatic recount.
Yeah, 11,000 votes. It's less than a half a point. So, you know what, folks? Next Monday, we may know something.
You're coming back tomorrow night, are you, Bro Cross?
Right. You know, it's technically possible that there could be a recount that could flip that. It seems unlikely at this hour, although I'm curious about why we're not seeing the governor yet. And we haven't seen Vice President Al Gore. Perhaps they're waiting for all the votes to be counted, all the I's to be dotted, all the T's to be crossed. That would be something if the networks managed to blow it twice in one night. Broward and Palm Beach are the uncounted votes. What if this goes the other way?
Oh, it's only 317. We're here. Cameras are hot.
That's entirely possible because we've got Tim gets his board out. Now we're going to take you to the Secretary of State's website and show you that. Oh, yeah.
There it is.
500 votes apart.
One of the reasons for Al Gore's delay, this is according to some of his low-level staffers, is that he has actually called George W. Bush and taken back his concession phone call.
I've just gotten off the phone. It is, in fact, true that the Vice President has called to recant his concession. I'm on the phone now, on hold, with an aide to Governor Bush, trying to get more information. At this point, everybody is working the phones, trying to find out the latest on Florida. But again, the most significant point here, we're not seeing Governor Bush because Al Gore has conceded, rather has recanted that concession that he gave earlier on this evening.
These people have worked their heart out to make sure that Al Gore is the next president of the United States, and we want to make sure that all those votes are counted, because at the end of the day, we know that when they're all counted, Al Gore will be president of the United States of America.
It's just far too confusing. We're about to make an official call. It's just too confusing. Florida's been in play all night long. It has not been a sterling evening for vote projections in that state. Originally, NBC News and all the other networks projected that Al Gore would win Florida. Then at 2:18 this morning, we project. All right, we're officially saying that Florida is too close to call because of a recall. Campaign and voter counters are being called back to work to count absentee ballots. Will that be going on throughout the evening, so far as we know? Yes, it will be happening even as we speak. They're being called back tonight. So we take Florida away from George W. Bush. That means he is short of the 270 electoral votes that he needs to win. If, in fact, it goes back into the George Bush column at the end of all this long, confusing tabulation, he's the president-elect. If it goes to Al Gore still has to win Wisconsin or Oregon to be the new president of the United States. So this could not be closer.
Tom, actually, all Al Gore needs is Florida. All George Bush needs is Florida.
Oh, that's right. It's 249, right? It's down to Florida.
It's Gore 249, right. Bush 246 right now.
Right.
With Florida, Oregon, and Wisconsin outstanding. But in Wisconsin, only 18 electoral votes. Right. They need Florida. Florida, Florida, Florida. Let me show you one more time, Tom. This is it, right here. Florida, 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 Florida. It's that kind of night. Or morning.
It is indeed.
But this race is simply too close to call. And until the recount is concluded and the results in Florida become official, our campaign continues.
The latest vote count in the state of Florida shows Governor Bush winning that state by more than 1,200 votes. They're still counting, and I'm confident when it's all said and done, we will prevail. Thank you again for all your hard work and all of your efforts, and we look forward to a great celebration.
So it remains not just possible, but it looks probable that Al Gore could win the popular vote yet and still lose the electoral vote.
That's why I believe he will be elected president. Let me just try to explain this novel theory as to why. The state to watch now is California. If it turns out that Al Gore wins the popular vote nationally, there will be intense pressure in this country to have him become the president. Most people think the guy with the most votes wins.
Everyone has said straight out, whoever wins 270 votes in the Electoral College is the next president of the United States.
Now, Al Gore has moved in front with 95% of the vote in so far. As you can see, he now has a lead of about 53,000 votes altogether.
We'll get to the promised land, Brother Tom.
I know, but the votes have been counted, and it's not up to the networks to get them there. The networks tonight, I think that it's fair to say, I think I indicated earlier, we don't just have egg in our face, we've got omelet all over our suits at this point, and on our face and everywhere else, because we awarded Florida erroneously at one point, came back and managed to make everything equal by awarding it erroneously a second time.
If you just stayed with these simple boards, you wouldn't have those problems. Those highfalutin computers, Tom, this is the answer. Get it right.
Well, that's right. We're trying to. It just takes a while. Because there is the popular vote, the President of the United States, and it's now up to 244,000 votes. In just 2 hours at 7 o'clock, Katie and Matt will be on with the Today Show. Surprise, Tim and I will be there with coffee and bagels, getting ready to serve them breakfast to welcome them to their place, because we know that they just can't get along without us on this morning.
And we'll put it all in perspective for them, Tom.
Well, indeed. We'll award Florida to one or the other. Who knows? Jonathan, thanks very much for being with us.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank all of you for this long evening. It's going to be a long day ahead.
Decision 2000. From NBC News World Headquarters in New York, this is NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw.
Good evening. The presidential election was 1 week ago tonight. And in Florida at this hour, we have new vote totals after a day of legal and political maneuvering. New totals, but still no winner of that state that will, after all, elect the new president of the United States. After a judge's ruling, counties did have to check in with the Secretary of State with their vote totals so far, but the judge left open the possibility of what he called supplemental filings. In other words, counties still tabulating have additional time. Palm Beach County is the major prize, the big kahuna, as one very senior Gore campaign official put it tonight. The vote as it stands tonight, as reported by the Office of Secretary of State and also by the Associated Press canvass, still has Governor Bush in the lead, but that does not include what could be supplemental filings from Palm Beach and Dade County and two other Democratic strongholds. NBC's David Bloom is in Florida tonight watching the vote. David Gregory is in Texas with the Bush camp. Claire Shipman covering the Gore side of things. David Bloom, let's begin with you with the latest from Florida now.
Tom, a flurry of developments tonight. Governor Bush's legal team now says they will go back to federal courts to ask an appeals court to block Florida's hand-by-hand, ballot-by-ballot recounting. But as of 5 p.m. Eastern time tonight, the deadline passed for all 67 Florida counties to get their election returns into the state. And if Florida's top election official, a Republican, gets her wish, this race will be over in 4 days. With the deadline passed, several heavily Democratic Florida counties are still recounting ballots by hand, but they may not count. And the presidency could be decided by Saturday, when Florida's absentee ballots are tabulated. Today, Tallahassee State Court Judge Terry Lewis ruled that Florida's Republican Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, was wrong to say categorically that any late returns will not count. That's not the exercise of discretion, Judge Lewis wrote. It is the abdication of discretion. But in what may be a huge legal victory for Governor Bush, Judge Lewis went on to say, quote, the Secretary of State may ignore any such late filed returns, but may not do so arbitrarily. Bottom line, Katherine Harris, a Republican, gets to decide what votes count. And late today, her office made clear Harris expects that when those overseas absentee ballots are counted early Saturday, this disputed Florida election will be over.
We anticipate knowing on Saturday who won the state when all the absentee ballots are in.
Not so fast, the Gore team said today, bringing in one of the nation's top litigators, David Boies, who won the Microsoft case for the government. Boies urging those Democratic counties recounting by hand to finish as fast as you can. And then he said, expect a fight.
If the Secretary of State arbitrarily refuses to accept the amended returns based on the recount and violates what this court has ruled is her duty, which is to accept those results unless she has a good reason not to, then we may be back in court.
In fact, both sides agree the Florida Supreme Court or the U.S. Supreme Court could wind up deciding who won Florida and thus who won the presidency. Today, the Bush team, led by former Secretary of State James Baker, offered what he called a good faith compromise, urging Vice President Gore to accept tonight's Florida vote count, add the absentee ballots, and declare a winner. The Democrats scoffed that Bush just wants to lock in a victory, but Baker, citing what he called uncertainty in financial markets and abroad, pointedly asked the Gore team, what's the alternative?
They may keep asking for recount after recount after recount. But when is it going to end? I ask you, when is it going to end?
The truth is, no one knows when this is going to end. Tonight, those Democratic Florida counties, together with the Gore campaign, are asking Florida's Supreme Court to let the hand recounts continue, even if that means taking this election into not just the weekend, but next week or beyond. Tom?
Thanks very much, NBC's David Bloom. Now let's go to NBC's David Gregory, who's in Texas, where Governor Bush continues to stay out of sight at his ranch north of Waco. David, they had hoped to wrap this all up by this evening, right?
Well, they had, Tom, but top advisors still see this as a net win for them for two primary reasons. One, they believe the end is in sight. The Secretary of State now saying that she believes she can call this race by Saturday with those absentee ballots being in means to them that this hand counting will not go on indefinitely. And two, they say the process now is no longer uniquely in the hands of local Democrats in Gore strongholds. As has been said, it is the Secretary of State who has the final say. But it is an incomplete victory because, as David notes, the hand counting goes on in various counties, and it appears at least that the Secretary of State will honor those amended ballots as they come in up until Saturday. Because of that, you still see the Bush campaign trying to do away with the hand counting altogether by reviving their appeal in federal court. That's the legal. What about the political? Well, the Bush campaign charges the longer this goes on, the worse it makes the Gore campaign look. Makes them look like they're deliberately stringing this out, trying to get a result that they like. That is bad, says Secretary Baker, for the country.
I believe that most observers, whether at home or abroad, are troubled by the prospect of seemingly endless counts and recounts until a candidate achieves the result he seeks.
Now, remember, the Bush campaign still remains confident that those ballots, those absentee ballots coming in from overseas will still break in large measure for Governor Bush, and that may be the hidden card here in the deck. Now, Governor Bush, where is he? He is still staying far away from all of this at his ranch in Crawford, Texas, and I'd say still quietly planning a transition. Tom?
Thanks very much, NBC's David Gregory tonight. Now for Vice President Gore's side of all of this. He remains in Washington tonight, where he plans an evening out with his wife Tipper and Senator and Mrs. Lieberman. NBC's Claire Shipman is covering the Vice President, who did buy some time today. Claire?
Tom, The Gore campaign does, in fact, see a silver lining in the judge's decision today that the hand counting in all likelihood will continue. As one aide said tonight, that is our top priority right now, to get those ballots counted by hand. Even if they're not automatically included in the total count, even if we have to fight it later, we want the numbers. We want the public to know what those numbers are, he said. So they're trying to take this legal decision, turn it to a political advantage by saying that the Florida Secretary of State will look biased unless she counts those numbers.
As all of that was unfolding today, Gore's campaign manager Bill Daley makes a pilgrimage to Capitol Hill to reassure Democrats. Sources say he found, quote, absolute support for Gore, especially on the immediate issue of getting what Democrats are calling a fair count. Daley's other goal today, to project calm, suggesting that, looking at the polls, people don't see a nation in crisis.
This is only a week, less than a week before, from the election, and you know, everything moves forward, and people's lives go on.
And tonight, Tom, friends say that Gore is still in a fighting mood, and one of them told me something interesting, that one of the people most encouraging Gore to keep fighting, someone best known for his caution, for his conciliatory nature, Joe Lieberman. Lieberman was apparently quite moved by stories that Holocaust victims in Florida may have voted for the wrong man, Pat Buchanan. And tonight, neither Gore nor Lieberman has given up on the idea of a longer court fight on that issue, Tom.
Thank you very much, NBC's Claire Shipman tonight. So how are all of you feeling about all of this? We have a new NBC Wall Street Journal poll tonight. One major finding, people at this point are willing to wait and sort out the vote count. The majority of those that we talked to, 55%, say it would be better to recount ballots, even if it takes several weeks to declare a winner. 41% say stop the recounts, declare a winner now. Part of the reason few think the situation is a constitutional crisis. Just 8% say the Florida situation is a crisis. Nearly a third say it could turn into one, but a majority, 56%, say it will be resolved before it becomes a constitutional crisis. As for how the two candidates have handled the vote count situation, split down the middle as the vote itself. 47% approve the way Gore is handling things. 47% approve the way that Governor Bush is handling all of this. Now let's take a closer look at the Florida election law that imposed today's 5 p.m. deadline. Joining me again tonight from Tallahassee is NBC's legal correspondent Dan Abrams. Dan, as we have heard, both sides say they're happy with this judge's decision. What does that mean in legal terms?
Well, Tom, it certainly leaves Florida in a sort of legal state of limbo, neither side getting exactly what they wanted, both sides getting just a little bit. The key to the ruling, that the Secretary of State here is now going to have to provide a reason, an explanation, if she decides to reject additional recount votes that come in after today. Some of the questions might be, was the recount actually necessary? Did the votes, for example, come in too late? And the answers to those questions could lead to more lawsuits. So why all this confusion? Seemingly contradictory statutes in the state of Florida. The Republicans, who are trying to stop the recount, cite one statute, which says if the county returns are not received by 5 p.m. of the 7th day following the election, they shall be ignored. The Democrats relied on the very next statute, which in part says if the returns are not received by the time specified, such returns may be ignored. Shall or may. Little words that could make a big difference, and now a ruling that's not providing any definitive answers. Tom?
And Dan, given that judge's instructions to the Secretary of State not to be arbitrary, given the broadness of his language, if she rules against, say, the Gore campaign, doesn't that open the door to still another appeal on their behalf?
Oh, no question. I mean, if she comes back and doesn't provide a reason that the Gore team is satisfied with, and you can count on the fact that the Gore team probably won't be satisfied with just about any reason if these recounts come in a somewhat timely fashion, they are going to go back to court to demand that these votes be counted. Tom?
Dan Abrams, thank you very much in Tallahassee tonight. Now let's focus for just a moment on the status of the recounts. Several counties, as we've heard, vowing to go ahead with the hand counts, most of them Democratic counties. NBC's Kerry Sanders is in this county with the most at stake tonight. Palm Beach County. Kerry, what's the latest there at the epicenter of all this?
Well, Tom, tonight in South Florida, in Miami-Dade County, a hand count is underway. Efforts in Broward County to force a hand count failed, but the real firestorm is right here in West Palm Beach.
Yes.
A day of confusion and false starts in Palm Beach County. 25 teams arriving just before 7 a.m. to begin hand counting 430,000 ballots. But to their surprise, they sit around for more than an hour doing nothing. And then they're told to go home. What happened? Secretary of State Harris sends a letter warning the county canvassing board is not authorized to manually recount ballots. It's just one more delay, and the 5 p.m. deadline is looming.
What do we want? Recount! What do we want it now?
Late afternoon, voters descend on the hurricane bunker, where the cases of ballots are stacked, demanding a revote.
Standing around doing nothing is not productive, and we need to go forward or not go forward.
Fearing the ballots cast here in Palm Beach will be left out of the state totals, the board decides they must turn in something. Just before 5 this afternoon, they fax certified numbers to the state elections office. But in defiance, they will hand count all the ballots here anyway.
What happens? Do we go to jail? Because I'm willing to go to jail.
Starting tomorrow, they'll try to do what they hope to do today, a hand count. Now, in Volusia, they have now completed hand counting 184,000 ballots. The hand count revealing a net gain for Gore of 98 votes.
And we begin tonight with NBC's Claire Shipman covering the vice president, David Gregory with the governor in Texas, and David Bloom in Florida. Claire, you begin, please, with the vice president's speech.
Tom, not even a hint of defeat in Al Gore's voice tonight as he delivered that speech, a speech he wrote almost entirely himself, a critical plea to the public to be patient as his lawyers keep arguing for Florida to recount the vote.
If the people do not, in the end, choose me, so be it. The outcome will have been fair, and the people will have spoken. If they choose me, so be it. I would then commit, and do commit, to bringing this country together. But whatever the outcome, let the people have their say, and let us listen. Ignoring votes means ignoring democracy itself. And if we ignore the votes of thousands in Florida in this election, how can you, or any American, have confidence that your vote will not be ignored in a future election? 200 years from now, when future Americans study this presidential election, let them learn that Americans did everything they could to ensure that all citizens who voted had their votes counted. Let them learn that democracy was ultimately placed ahead of partisan politics in resolving a contested election.
Gore again marshaling what he thinks are his most critical arguments, that this is a legal process, it is a process with an end, and again his most important argument that he thinks another recount is the only fair solution. It's an argument we're going to be hearing from Gore over and over again in the coming days. Tom.
Thanks very much, NBC's Claire Shipman tonight. At the same time in Texas, Governor George W. Bush and his vice presidential running mate Dick Cheney are moving swiftly to plan for what they're confident will be a Bush White House come January. NBC's David Gregory is in Austin tonight. David?
Well, Tom, in many ways, Governor Bush was anticipating this speech from the vice president tonight through his own actions, even as he tells his top aides to keep calling him governor and not Mr. President-elect. Governor Bush has been working very hard to portray his certification in Florida as complete victory. One advisor saying tonight the strategy now is to convince the public that Al Gore is, quote, standing in the way.
Morning, everybody.
Eager to be seen as the president-elect, Governor Bush gets down to business this morning, meeting with top aides, including his chief of staff, Andrew Card, to discuss the Florida legal fight and the transition. In Washington, his running mate and the man heading the transition team, Dick Cheney, today complains about the administration withholding the $5.3 million in federal money and this office space normally afforded the new administration. Cheney announces the Bush team will raise private money for the transition.
This is regrettable because we believe the government has an obligation to honor the certified results of the election.
Today, the General Services Administration, which releases resources to a new administration, insists strict guidelines leave its hands tied.
Today, we don't see a clear winner, and as long as both sides are still in court, and both sides are, we think the winner is unapparent.
At the White House, President Clinton says he played no role in the decision to deny Bush official government space, and he signs an executive order establishing a transition coordinating council to assist whichever man ultimately wins. The president avoids a question about whether he accepts the certified Florida vote.
It's not up for me to accept or reject. There is a legal process here. It'll be over soon, and we'll be ready for the transition.
Advisors insist that Bush, who, by the way, is not receiving the same level of Secret Service protection normally provided a president-elect, is indeed not getting ahead of himself. They maintain that, for instance, cabinet appointments will not be publicly announced for some time, except a select few. That may include Colin Powell, who is expected to be officially named Secretary of State in a Bush White House as early as later this week. Tom?
Thanks very much, NBC's David Gregory tonight. While both sides were maneuvering for political advantage today, the legal contest was joined in a Florida courtroom. NBC's David Bloom is covering that part of the story for us now. David?
Tom, until today, no presidential candidate had ever gone to court seeking to overturn the results of an election. But today, Vice President Gore's lawyers asked a state court judge here in Tallahassee to declare not Governor Bush, but the vice president the winner of this race.
Order in court, all rise.
In a Tallahassee courtroom this afternoon, an emergency hearing. Vice President Gore's lawyers asking Leon County Circuit Judge Sanders Sauls to fast-track their election challenge so that the undisputed winner of Florida's 25 electoral votes can be quickly determined before a December 12th deadline for the state to pick its electoral college voters.
These are obviously ballots that ultimately the court has got to make a judicial decision on. And because of the time frame, we want to get them here so that that can proceed as soon as the court is prepared to turn to that.
In court papers filed this afternoon, Gore's lawyers contend that in 3 Florida counties, Miami-Dade, Palm Beach, and Nassau, quote, the vote totals are wrong. Gore arguing that he would have picked up an additional 600 votes in Miami-Dade if that county had not illegally stopped its manual recount of some 10,000 disputed ballots. Gore's team blaming that controversial decision on, quote, a campaign of personal attacks launched by Bush supporters. In Palm Beach County, Gore claims he would have netted 800 additional votes if so-called dimpled ballots had been properly counted. With the votes so close, Bush officially winning Florida by only 537 votes, Democratic congressional leaders fly to Tallahassee today. And after their conference call with the vice president, argue their party is united behind Gore, pleading for the country's patience.
It's premature for either side to declare victory or concede, because the fact is all the votes are still not in.
But already some Democrats are questioning just how long Gore should fight.
The country has to get on with its life, and the country needs a president.
Al Gore would be a far better president than George W. Bush. But at some point, you've got to say enough is enough.
Neither Torricelli nor Reich is urging the vice president to throw in the towel quite yet. But when Democrats begin to suggest that the end is near, it makes it that much more difficult for the vice president to stop public opinion from turning against him. Tom?
Thanks very much, NBC's David Bloom tonight. There are so many claims and counterclaims, so many numbers flying through the air. It is difficult to keep track of what counts and where. So tonight, the ballots that are being contested and in what counties. NBC's national correspondent is Jim Avila.
From recounts to courtrooms across Florida, today the Gore campaign focuses on 3 counties in a desperate effort to find 538 votes, enough to win the state and the presidency. First stop, Nassau County, northeast corner of the state. 51 votes on the line here. In dispute, the election board's abrupt decision to file the first machine recount results rather than the subsequent hand recount that gave Gore more votes.
Let every vote count. So why not go back and count them?
Next, Palm Beach, 210 votes immediately at stake. In dispute, the election board missed the Secretary of State's deadline. The machine original recount was certified, costing the vice president votes. And finally, and most important, Miami-Dade. 2 issues here. First, 157 new Gore votes tallied before the recount was suspended and never added to the Gore column. And then the big prize, 10,000 uncounted disputed ballots. These are the punch cards on which machines found no presidential votes. They've not been counted by hand.
The presidential election for the year 2000
hinges on whether the manual recount is required in Miami-Dade County or not.
Miami-Dade, not a huge overall margin for Gore here, 53-46. But experts say in a recount, Democrats frequently collect the majority of disputed votes.
The Democrats tend to be the people that are making these errors, and I think that's probably so because the Democrats tend to be older, sometimes they're sporadic voters.
So how do the numbers add up? Al Gore has a 537 certified vote lead to overcome. If he wins his case in Nassau County, the Bush lead shrinks to 486. If Gore wins his case in Palm Beach, the Bush lead shrinks again to 276. If he wins in Miami-Dade, the Bush lead shrinks to 119. Not enough votes for Gore unless the courts rule his way down the line. A political struggle in both the courtroom and the counting room. The Democrats hope will overturn the Florida certified vote and leave Al Gore president. Jim Avila, NBC News, Palm Beach.
As for the contest proceeding itself, this afternoon's hearing in Leon County Circuit Court was a reminder of just how much time the Gore team needs to accomplish all of this and how little time they have to do it. It's a whole new game of beat the clock. NBC's chief legal correspondent is Dan Abrams. He's in Tallahassee again tonight. Dan?
Well, Tom, it was a somewhat confusing day inside the courtroom with the lawyers emerging somewhat unsure about what the schedule would be. One thing was clear. The Gore team wants this to be resolved as quickly as possible, and yet it won't be resolved this week. Here's what we know. The Gore team will submit its list of witnesses and exhibits tomorrow, although the judge actually gave them until Wednesday. 2 days later, the Bush team submits its list, and then by Friday, they have to file a response to the papers filed by Gore today. But that's just the beginning. Then there's the discovery process, where each side gets an opportunity to look at the other's exhibits and witnesses. That could take a week, putting us to about a week before the December 12th deadline. And even if the trial starts earlier, the Gore team is asking for manual recounts, which could take time. The bottom line, this deadline is approaching all too fast for the Gore team. Tom?
And Dan, what do we know about the judge involved in this case?
Well, according to friends of Judge Sanders Sauls, he's the perfect judge for the job. Here's what we know about him. He's 59 years old, a graduate of the University of Florida Law School, appointed to the bench in 1989 by Republican Governor Bob Martinez, even though he's now a registered Democrat. And those who've argued before him describe him as conservative for this court. He was the chief judge of this circuit, which covers 6 counties, including Tallahassee, until 1998. And inside the courtroom today, he seemed to say that he was not going to treat this case any differently than any other case on the fast track. Tom?
Dan Abrams in Tallahassee tonight. Thanks very much. Vice President Gore and his supporters may be trying to make the case that their contest is on solid legal ground. But, as NBC's Pete Williams tells us tonight, the bar is set very high.
Miami's mayor, Joe Carollo, a national figure after his passionate pleas on behalf of Elian Gonzalez, turns out to be an inspiration to the Gore legal team. 3 years ago, he used Florida law for contesting an election, and he won. Declaring that phony absentee ballots tainted a victory for his opponent, a state court threw those votes out and pronounced Carollo the winner.
I was able to overturn the election because we were able to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that it had been stolen from me.
Now some of the same lawyers who helped Mayor Carollo are working for the Gore campaign, but they face this sobering fact. Carollo is the only Florida candidate ever to win any significant election by contesting the results. It seldom works, partly because courts are reluctant to step in without clear proof that something went wrong, and partly because when they do intervene, they don't rule in or out enough votes to change the outcome. It's the same big legal hurdle outside Florida, too. Republican Ellen Saubre finally gave up her legal challenge when courts didn't find enough votes to make her the winner of Maryland's 1994 governor's race. That same year, the Connecticut Supreme Court actually recounted some of the votes in a contested election for Congress, but not enough to make challenger Edward Munster the winner. As for contesting a presidential election, a lawyer who helped Mayor Carollo win his contest says Gore's legal team will face a much bigger challenge in convincing a judge to overturn these results.
There's very little precedent, and the stakes are extremely, extremely high, the presidency of the United States. So with very little precedent to guide them, judges are going to be very reluctant.
Tonight, while Gore's lawyers hope they'll have Joe Carollo's luck, he hopes they won't. He's a Republican, and he thinks Gore should give up. Pete Williams, NBC News, Washington.
And joining me now is NBC's Washington bureau chief and moderator of Meet the Press, Tim Russert. Tim, the vice president tonight tried to give the impression that he was above the politics of all of this, but the political lines have hardened. There was a congressional Democratic leadership in Florida today, and we read in the Wall Street Journal that Tom DeLay, who is the Republican whip in the House, has been sending operatives into Florida organizing those protests.
Tom, by our count, over 300 members of Congress or their staffs have spent time in Florida. And it's been a very partisan, emotional debate down there. And that battle will be brought to Washington. No matter who the next president is, Gore or Bush, they're going to have an extremely hard time getting around that. Also, both parties are now looking at the year 2002, midterm elections, an opportunity to capture the House, capture the Senate, making real progress extremely difficult for either George W. Bush or Al Gore.
Tim, we know that Friday the U.S. Supreme Court takes up this on an appeal from the Bush campaign. If the court rules for Bush and against Al Gore, it's pretty much over.
It sure is, Tom. Closest advisors to Al Gore say that it's game, set, match, that he would respect the decision of the Supreme Court and step aside and look forward to perhaps a rematch in the year 2004. However, they believe they're going to be successful in the Supreme Court, and they believe that if they're successful in the state courts of Florida, particularly getting that recount in Miami-Dade, they still have a chance of winning Florida.
News, Decision 2000, the final chapter. Here is Tom Brokaw.
Good evening. Tonight, 36 days after the presidential election, the bittersweet ritual of conceding. Vice President Al Gore about to address the nation, knowing that he will not move into this House on January 20th, the White House, where for the last 8 years he's had an office and a major role in the affairs of state. His last hope for getting there ended last night a little more than 2 miles away at the U.S. Supreme Court, where in a 5-4 decision, the justices ruled that the latest recount of votes in Florida could not stand. While in Austin, Texas tonight, George W. Bush prepares his own speech to the nation, scheduled for 1 hour from now. In this special report tonight, we'll examine the many challenges before America as the presidency changes hands. Now, from the old Executive Office building in Washington next to the White House, here is the Vice President of the United States.
Good evening. Just moments ago, I spoke with George W. Bush and congratulated him on becoming the 43rd President of the United States. And I promised him that I wouldn't call him back this time. I offered to meet with him as soon as possible so that we can start to heal the divisions of the campaign and the contest through which we've just passed. Almost a century and a half ago, Senator Stephen Douglas told Abraham Lincoln, who had just defeated him for the presidency, "Partisan feeling must yield to patriotism." I'm with you, Mr. President, and God bless you. Well, in that same spirit, I say to President-elect Bush that what remains of partisan rancor must now be put aside, and may God bless his stewardship of this country. Neither he nor I anticipated this long and difficult road. Certainly neither of us wanted it to happen. Yet it came, and now it has ended, resolved as it must be resolved through the honored institutions of our democracy. Over the library of one of our great law schools is inscribed the motto, "Not under man, but under God and law." That's the ruling principle of American freedom, the source of our democratic liberties. I've tried to make it my guide throughout this contest, as it has guided America's deliberations of all the complex issues of the past 5 weeks. Now the U.S. Supreme Court has spoken. Let there be no doubt, while I strongly disagree with the court's decision, I accept it. I accept the finality of this outcome, which will be ratified next Monday in the Electoral College. And tonight, for the sake of our unity as a people and the strength of our democracy, I offer my concession. I also accept my responsibility, which I will discharge unconditionally, to honor the new president-elect and do everything possible to help him bring Americans together in fulfillment of the great vision that our Declaration of Independence defines and that our Constitution affirms and defends. Let me say how grateful I am to all those who supported me and supported the cause for which we have fought. Tipper and I feel a deep gratitude to Joe and Hadassah Lieberman, who brought passion and high purpose to our partnership and opened new doors, not just for our campaign, but for our country. This has been an extraordinary election, but in one of God's unforeseen paths, this belatedly broken impasse can point us all to a new common ground, for its very closeness can serve to remind us that we are one people with a shared history and a shared destiny. Indeed, that history gives us many examples of contests as hotly debated, as fiercely fought, with their own challenges to the popular will. Other disputes have dragged on for weeks before reaching resolution, and each time both the victor and the vanquished have accepted the result peacefully and in a spirit of reconciliation. So let it be with us. I know that many of my supporters are disappointed. I am too. But our disappointment must be overcome by our love of country. And I say to our fellow members of the world community, let no one see this contest as a sign of American weakness. The strength of American democracy is shown most clearly through the difficulties it can overcome. Some have expressed concern that the unusual nature of this election might hamper the next president in the conduct of his office. I do not believe it need be so. President-elect Bush inherits a nation whose citizens will be ready to assist him in the conduct of his large responsibilities. I personally will be at his disposal, and I call on all Americans. I particularly urge all who stood with us to unite behind our next president. This is America. Just as we fight hard when the stakes are high, we close ranks and come together when the contest is done. And while there will be time enough to debate our continuing differences, now is the time to recognize that that which unites us is greater than that which divides us. While we yet hold and do not yield our opposing beliefs, there is a higher duty than the one we owe to political party. This is America, and we put country before party. We will stand together behind our new president. As for what I'll do next, I don't know the answer to that one yet. Like many of you, I'm looking forward to spending the holidays with family and old friends. I know I'll spend time in Tennessee and mend some fences, literally and figuratively. Some have asked whether I have any regrets, and I do have one regret, that I didn't get the chance to stay and fight for the American people over the next 4 years, especially for those who need burdens lifted and barriers removed, especially for those who feel their voices have not been heard. I heard you, and I will not forget. I've seen America in this campaign, and I like what I see. It's worth fighting for, and that's a fight I'll never stop. As for the battle that ends tonight, I do believe, as my father once said, that no matter how hard the loss, defeat may serve as well as victory to shake the soul and let the glory out. So for me, this campaign ends as it began, with the love of Tipper and our family, with faith in God and in the country I have been so proud to serve, from Vietnam to the vice presidency, and with gratitude to our truly tireless campaign staff and volunteers, including all those who worked so hard in Florida for the last 36 days. Now the political struggle is over, and we turn again to the unending struggle for the common good of all Americans and for those multitudes around the world who look to us for leadership in the cause of freedom. In the words of our great hymn, America, America, let us crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. And now, my friends, in a phrase I once addressed to others, it's time for me to go. Thank you, and good night, and God bless America.
Vice President Al Gore, flanked by his family and his friend and running mate, Joe Lieberman, who was the vice presidential candidate, the first Jewish American to occupy such a high station in American political life, and his wife Hadassah, in what can only be described as a graceful speech of reconciliation from the old Executive Office Building, which is right next door to the White House in Washington, D.C. It could not have been an easy task for this very competitive man who has spent most of his adult life in politics. It was the great dream of his late father, the Senator Albert Gore from Tennessee, that his son would be the President of the United States one day, and perhaps he will be one day. He said that which divides us, that which unites us, must be greater than that which divides us. And he called on those people who supported him during this campaign to back Texas Governor George W. Bush, who will be the 43rd President of the United States. He also said at the outset, of course, that he had made that telephone call to the governor in Austin, and this time he said he would not be calling back. You'll recall on election morning, very early, there were those two calls, first conceding and then saying, well, just a moment, it does look like it could be close in Florida, and indeed it was. It took more than a month to sort all of that. Presidential election. You have a president-elect who is the champion of the Southeast, the Southwest, the Great Plains, and some of the Rocky Mountain West. You have another candidate who appears to be the choice of the Northeast, the industrial Midwest, and the Far West. One man won a majority of the votes, Al Gore. The other man, Texas Governor George Bush, won the Electoral College.